Hello, and welcome to the Radiant Mission Podcast. My name is Rebecca Toomey, and I am here with my amazing co-host and sister, Rachel Smith.
Hey, guys.
We are on a mission to encourage and inspire you as you're navigating through this life and in your relationship with Christ. Today, we're beginning a super fun series on the most popular holidays in at least our country, the United States. I'm sure other countries celebrate some of these or a variation. And really what we want to get into is kind of the what and why behind why Christians celebrate them. And we're not doing them in chronological order. We actually decided to start kind of towards the end of the year with Halloween.
Yeah. The easiest one.
The easiest one. This is a very interesting one for us to talk about. I think we'll share a little bit about our background with Halloween as we get into this more. But I know that it's important that you wanted to really preface that we are both in agreement that the goal of this episode on Halloween or our series on the holidays to talk about the Christian, why Christians celebrate some of these holidays or participate in them has nothing to do with condemnation, bringing anyone down, making anybody feel bad about the choices that they're making. It's simply because we've had these discussions with other people, and we've had a lot of discussions with people that are like, I've been doing this, but I don't think I want to do this anymore. So how do I get out of that? Especially Halloween. That's one that I have talked to a number of people that are like, I'm pregnant with my first child and I don't want to do Halloween. What does that look like? Or people that have said, I've done Halloween with my kids, but now I don't want to. What does that look like?
Yeah.
And we didn't necessarily plan to talk about those details today. Go ahead. What did you say?
I was just going to say that's where I was at when I first had my kids. I did Halloween in the beginning. Mm-hmm. And then exactly what you're saying was at the point of like, oh, I don't really feel comfortable with this anymore, but how do I stop?
Yeah.
So I think that is, like you said, we're not condemning anyone. We're not trying to be haters. We're not like, I'm not even going into this. I think, in general, like it could sound like we're biased because we're two people who don't celebrate Halloween, but I once did. So I do come from a background of understanding like the justifications and then not feeling so great about it and what it looks like to walk through that.
Yeah.
And try not to be a jerk about it.
Yeah. I think that's why we want to talk about it though, because, you mentioned that, our hearts are for encouraging other believers in their walks. And this topic is really no different. We just want to have a conversation about some of the things that the Lord has revealed to us. And we're hoping that it encourages you as you're listening and, just consider and pray over these things. I know that holidays and celebrating certain things can be very sensitive and personal. And so this is not at all an attack. And, we want you to go into it with an open heart and an open mind about, what we're going to share. I know Rachel, she spent like 4 hours planning for this, just making sure that she had the right research to discuss and things of that nature. But I guess before we get into some of that, let's share our background really quick because we grew up, we did not celebrate Halloween when we were growing up. Our parents made the decision that Halloween was not going to be one of the things that we did as a holiday. So what did that look like? Well, when we were very young, it looked like we just left the light off on the front porch and we didn't hand out candy or anything like that to when kids came. And as we got older, we did participate in trunk or treats if our church had them. And then I obviously didn't have kids until recently. So there was a long period of time where I was like between being an adult before I had kids, that I didn't celebrate Halloween because it didn't mean anything to me. But if my friends had a Halloween party, I would attend. Or sometimes I would do makeup looks because, Rachel and I used to be makeup artists. I would use that as a kind of opportunity to do things that I would never do with makeup because I'm a very vanilla makeup person, so I'd be like, "Oh, I'll do a mermaid look," or whatever.
Yeah.
Although one year I did do Day of the Dead, so that's pretty bad.
I did a lot of those. Yeah.
Yeah, or like when I did that zombie thing, that was around Halloween time, but not for Halloween. So it's not,
Yeah.
it's all to say like, I'm not a perfect human being that like never did anything around this
It's
holiday, but I never had um a desire to really celebrate Halloween. So, and then share your story, your background a little bit with this.
Yeah, I was gonna say, if anything, I got way more into it than you.
Mhm.
Like you said, as children, it just isn't the way that our parents raised us to participate in. We did do church things, like trunk or treats and stuff. For me, though, when I got to be a teenager, I was I'm the youngest in our family, the youngest of four, and I was the first and only one of us that went to public school. And I started freshman year of high school, and so I started making more friends. I had my first boyfriend and things like that. And that's when the first time I actually ever went trick or treating, I was 16 years old and went with my boyfriend, my high school boyfriend. And then I remember the next year planning like a big Halloween party with him. Like I really was getting into it. It felt like it kind of me going out into the world opened up this door, really
Open the
opened on
world.
Halloween for me. Yeah. But I mean, there were in some ways like pivotal things that happened in my life because I started celebrating Halloween
Mm.
at 16.
Pivotal
So
meaning what? Like not great things or
no, nothing good. No, nothing good. So then it like continued that in a way. I think I can see the spiritual warfare. Not, I don't think that. I know that for a fact. I
Mm,
can see the spiritual warfare of a door that opened up in me the
mhm,
first time I celebrated Halloween. And then I became, I don't want to say obsessed because that sounds kind of dramatic, but I was very consumed. I
mm,
I ended up every year like really looking forward to it and putting a lot of effort in a costume. And then I
mhm,
was in college and going to parties and drinking and doing things that are not God honoring, I can tell you that.
mhm.
And college Halloween is big in like college towns like I lived in. And it's interesting because a lot of people today kind of think it is just like a kid's thing, but people go all out in college too, but it's not innocent
It's
at
like the
all.
most debaucherous
It
night
is.
of the
It's
year.
completely debaucherous. And that is, I really participated in a lot. And so, then fast forward to the rest of my adulthood after college, when I met my now husband and started dating him and then graduated, and he like never liked Halloween. He thinks it's dumb. Like he just is like
He was ahead
he
of the curve.
he probably in college went to Halloween parties, but like would not dress up. Like I couldn't imagine him doing
Except
that.
for that time you made him dress up as Jim, or you were Jim.
Well,
He was
yeah,
Dwight.
yeah. I was Dwight. He was Jim.
Oh, okay, okay.
But
From The
that wasn't even for
Office.
a Halloween party. That was for, yeah, we did an office themed birthday party for
Oh, it was
someone.
for a birthday. Okay.
Yeah. That was the only time I got him to dress up, but he literally looked like Jim
He
back then.
didn't need
So it
to
wasn't,
dress up. He
but
he
that
already
was the
was.
joke because Jim would never dress up, for the Halloween parties and the episodes.
Mhm,
So anyway, but then once we had kids, it was like that, what was the word I used? Not the obsession, but the captivation with Halloween like really came back of
mhm,
now I have a baby and a toddler, and I, want to plan it. And at this time too, like when I was a makeup artist, I was doing people's makeup for Halloween, and I was getting really into it creatively myself. And like you mentioned, Day of the Dead, like I was doing Day of the Dead looks all the time. So I really did become consumed with it.
Mhm.
So I think it's good that you wanted us to just touch on this a little bit, that especially for me, when I started just feeling, it started with maybe a little bit of conviction. And then if anyone's listened to any of our episodes so far, you probably could tell that I like to research things, and I don't let things go until I like come to a understanding. Like I like to understand why it is that we do things both individually and as like a society or
Mhm.
a religion. I like to also understand like where things come from.
Mhm.
So when I was starting to feel, after I had my second son, a little bit of conviction on this, I then wanted to understand, like, I knew that what I had done in the past was wrong. And like the way that I had participated in Halloween was clearly, like you said, debaucherous. And,
Mhm.
but then initially my opinion was like, well, but I, it's just my kids getting candy, and I wouldn't let them, dress in anything demonic. Like it was like Pikachu, although some people argue
Pikachu is
that those
arguable.
are demonic. um, but anyways, so yeah, it definitely comes from a place of like, we might not have like the same childhood like connections that a lot of people have to this holiday particularly,
Mhm.
but I really was pretty consumed by it
Mhm.
for a good portion of my life.
Yeah.
So for me to
Yeah.
dig in and do this research and to have my paradigms challenged, it's
Yeah.
not fun and it's not easy.
Mhm.
And then to
Yeah.
do something about it, like actually like, okay, here's what I've found. Now, am I going to do anything with this information?
Yeah, because you were already in it. You were already celebrating it. You were doing it with your kids at this
Yeah.
point. And then you had to say, okay, is this something I'm not going to do anymore?
Right.
Which I think is a lot more challenging than even. So Mike grew up celebrating Halloween his whole entire life, of course, because, he's most people are, right?
Right.
And we never, except for once he got to be an adult, really, he didn't, it was more his mom kind of getting him outfits when he was a little kid and stuff like that. So now when we got married and had Brooke, that was when we really were questioning, are we going to celebrate Halloween? So she was born at the end of the last day of December, December 31st. So she was going to be almost 1 when Halloween came around. And we had to make the decision, like, are we going to do this or are we not going to do this?
Yeah.
And Mike and I had both of us had a very, conviction that, first of all, she's a baby. So we don't even need to bother with this. And it also helps that our neighborhood, there aren't a lot of kids that live in our neighborhood. It's mostly grandchildren that come to the neighborhood that our kids play with. And nobody comes here because it's not a good candy neighborhood. And so we didn't do anything that year. And it wasn't really until the next year that we had a really strong conviction that we were not going to do it.
Yeah.
And that year I actually was potty training her on Halloween. And I remember, she's doesn't have any clothes on because she was getting
That
potty
would have been
trained.
last year, right?
No, that was when she was almost 2. So it wasn't this past Halloween, it was the year before.
Okay.
And I'm like literally walking by the door as someone's knocking on it. And I opened the door and it was one of my neighbors and her grandkids were visiting. And she was like, why aren't you guys out? And I'm like, we're potty training. And that was kind of all I really said about it, because I don't want people to be like, we don't celebrate Halloween and make them feel weird about it. But we had felt a really strong conviction that year. And it came from really talking about it with Mike. And like, what did you do when you were a kid? And he was like, honestly, Halloween was evil. And I was like, really interesting. And he said there was I didn't do anything good on Halloween once I got to
Mhm.
be a teenager. He was like, it was all about drinking or egging people's houses or like just doing these terrible things. And when I think back on being a teenager celebrating Halloween, I don't want to celebrate this. It's not good. And he
Yeah.
just felt that strong conviction. And, so it's interesting to me that somebody who grew up really doing it his whole life and he was, was a thing, part of it, that he had made that decision. But it was easier for, I think, in the sense that we didn't start doing it and then stop doing it. But it
Yeah.
was challenging that his parents didn't understand it
Mhm.
at first. Well, I don't think they still probably do, but they would send outfits and Halloween stuff and like stuff with skeletons on it. And I'm just like, I'm sorry, like, please don't send this stuff because we're not going to do anything with it. I don't want you to waste your money. And so I want to get back to yours. You're kind of like where you guys went, but I'll leave with the funniest thing is his parents were visiting recently and something about Halloween came up and our mom and his mom were sitting in the room and Brooke just shouts out, "We don't celebrate Halloween." And his mom was like, she seemed like shocked almost, but she
Yeah.
knows because he's told her and I've told her, and now our 3-year-old has told her. But it's
Yeah.
just anyway, wanted to kind of share that background too,
Yeah.
because Mike and I come from different places, and he's somebody who grew up with it and still made that choice.
It's interesting because Chris also comes from a background that he celebrated Halloween growing up. I don't think he necessarily came to this same conclusion the same way as Mike did.
Mhm.
He just like doesn't like it. Like I have to ask him actually, like, what is I think he just doesn't like it because he just thinks it's like silly to dress up. I think he even kind of felt that way as a kid.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
he just for some reason just doesn't have connections to it. But so like when I was the one pushing it to do with our kids, and then I started feeling like I don't think we should do this, and he's like, "Great. I don't want to do it anyway. I definitely don't want to spend money on it."
Chris is a practical guy, so I could
Yeah, he's
imagine
very
him being like,
practical.
"Oh, good, some one less thing to spend hundreds
Yeah,
of dollars on."
exactly. So the last Halloween I did with my kids, my older son was 3. It was right after we moved to Texas. My older son was 3 and my younger son would have been like a year and a half.
Mhm.
And I remember that my older son wanted to be Spider-Man. I got him a Spider-Man costume, which is really funny because my kids actually do really like dressing up. We have like a costume bin that they just play with all the time. Like any given day, they'll be wearing costume all day. And they still have that Spider-Man costume, and both of them squeeze their giant bodies into this 3 Spider-Man costume. I don't even know if they remember that it was from the last Halloween we ever celebrated. But so they were young. So in
Mhm.
that sense, it was kind of easy to transition out of.
Mhm.
Of course, the last Halloween we celebrated, I did not know that was going to be our last because, like I've mentioned in the past on this podcast, the time when we moved to Texas was when the Lord was really doing a really powerful work in my heart. And so it would have been the following spring when I was having all these convictions about celebrating Passover
Mhm.
and partying from Easter a little bit. And then that just kept rapidly growing. So that summer after, we bought our first house in Texas and moved to a new town. And what's so interesting to me is we moved into this street that had so many little kids on it, like kids all around the same age as my kids. There was at least 8 or 10 kids on our street the same age as my kids.
Mhm.
And in a lot of ways that was really cool and it was great because my kids could go outside and play with them. But then it came, this was in summer, and then it came around to September, and I have fresh conviction we're not celebrating Halloween this year. Like, I had decided that in the summer, and that's when Chris was like, "Great, I would love to not do that." And the neighbors were all like kind of meeting each other slowly, and one of them wanted to have a meeting at the end of the block to discuss a huge Halloween block party for all the families on the street to do together. And that was the first time that I had to put my money where my mouth was, so to speak, and say, we don't celebrate Halloween. And
Yeah.
then have people be like, why? So
Yeah.
it's always it's so interesting to me how the Lord works in my life, because I get a conviction. I decide, okay, I'm going to do this. And
Mhm.
then fresh off my conviction, the Lord's like, here's an opportunity to see if you're really going to stand
Yeah.
by your
I
word.
remember that. And that was like a lot of people
Yeah.
that
A
were
lot of
getting
people.
together, going to throw this huge party. It was everybody in your
Yeah.
neighborhood.
It was,
And you had to say, I don't celebrate Halloween. Sorry. And then they even went a step further and they said, well, what if we just say that it's a fall or a harvest party or
yeah.
something? And you were like, sorry, man.
They really wanted to go out of their way to include, so we could be included. And that it was hard for me, to be honest,
Yeah.
because one, like, of course you want to like be a part of your neighborhood and get to know people and for your kids to have fun. So it just felt like really interesting to me of we had lived so many different places. So now my kids are almost 4, or they're 4 and 2 by that point.
Mhm.
And at no point in their lives had I lived somewhere conveniently where we could have celebrated Halloween. I went out of my way to celebrate Halloween before that.
Mhm.
And now I'm convicted not to do it. And I have all these people around me like, oh, well, what if we do this? Or what if we do that? And I just said, I'm sorry. It's just not something that we participate in.
Mhm.
And I even had one neighbor ask me why. And so it's so interesting to me that I I have to be faced with my convictions very early on in them. Because today, if someone were to ask me that, it'd be like, no big deal, no brainer. And even
Yeah.
my kids are used to it now.
Mhm.
So, we did make sure though, because we knew we would see the whole street,
Yeah.
you know,
Everybody's
lined
having a
with
party.
people and kids in costumes, that we took left with our kids, because I do realize for my 4 and my 2-year-old to see these friends that they just met that they're playing with every day out in costumes, like that would be hard for them,
Yeah.
because kids don't necessarily understand.
Mhm.
So we went out and did something fun at a friend's house outside of the neighborhood and came home later that night. And it was actually kind of sweet. One of the neighbors left a big bag of candy at our door for us. Like, they really did try to include us. So it's all of that to say, really, is it's hard
Mhm.
to not be a part of what everyone else is doing.
Yeah.
It's not easy.
Yeah.
To me, it was, am I going to choose my conviction, which is hard
Mhm.
and not very fun, or am I going to choose what's fun and easy and includes me?
Mhm. But you knew that the Lord calls us to be set apart and to
Exactly.
be set apart from the world. And that's why we wanted to talk about this topic. And what you're going to get into is how we got to where we are with this whole holiday and why people celebrate it, in the hopes that other people might, just have a clearer picture of why some people don't celebrate it as Christians, because this is not a Christian holiday. First of all, let's go ahead and preface it with that. Some may argue there is a Catholic root to it. We're going to talk about that,
Yeah.
but it's not a Christian holiday. It's not a biblical holiday. I mean, go listen to the feast episodes. You'll hear what holidays are appointed by God, and this is not one of them.
Right.
This is one of the world's holidays. So let's get into that.
Yeah.
Let's talk about what that means.
Yeah. Let's get into the background. So I will start by defining a term that we hear a lot around all of these holidays. And I think this
Mhm.
is important. It is a hot button trigger word that people, including, Christians, seem to argue over whether or not it has to do with these holidays. And that word is pagan. I know I have one of my sons will be like, that's pagan. So to set the tone for this series, I want to preface that we are not going to make these episodes all about whether or not these holidays are pagan. I
Mhm.
think that's kind of what people by this point in listening might be assuming where we're going with this. And so I just we're going to talk about these things, but it's not what it is. All of this is going to be about for us.
Yeah.
But I do think we need to define that term, pagan or paganism, so that we're all on the same page of what exactly that means as we approach discussion on this topic.
Mhm.
So, from the Oxford Dictionary, the word pagan is defined as a person holding religious beliefs other than those of the main or recognized religions. Dictionary.com defines pagan as a member of a religious, spiritual, or cultural community based on the worship of nature or the earth. And finally, Merriam-Webster Dictionary defines paganism as spiritual beliefs and practices other than those of Judaism, Islam, or especially Christianity, such as the spiritual beliefs and practices of ancient polytheistic religions or the beliefs and practices of contemporary religions or spiritual movements based on ancient paganism.
Mhm.
So I think that last definition kind of, to me, seems the most accurate for what most people are thinking of. So if we really think about this from the ancient Hebrew perspective, like the biblical perspective, which I personally do, since that's the foundation of our Christian beliefs,
Mhm.
the word heathen seemed to be what they used in the Bible for a pagan person.
Mhm.
And that is meant that meant a person or a group of people who worshiped anything other than the one true God and creator, Yahweh. So this is what the Bible defines as idolatry in both the Old and the New Testaments. So thinking of it this way, we can get into the weeds about what it is what is pagan, what's not. But that's not really necessary. So to just keep it simple, paganism is idolatry, and idolatry is practicing the ways of paganism.
Sure.
It,
And if we wanted to, if anyone wants to get into this a little bit deeper, please listen back on some of our first few episodes where we talked about the Nephilim
yeah,
to kind of get more clarity on where the polytheistic religions came from. We
right.
also addressed this in the Pharmakia episodes.
Hmm.
So if you go back to those episodes, you'll get kind of more of a basis on that aspect of it being worshiping more than one god, where those gods came from, Genesis gods, little g gods,
Right,
where they came from. Oh, Genesis 6.
right,
And this is based on Genesis 6. So just to start there, because I know, and here's the thing, I think that this is something that you and I have both come across a lot of different things in our research that obviously can base a lot of our traditional holidays on quote pagan or pagan roots or pagan background. I mean, pharmakia slash modern day pharmaceuticals can even be traced back to that.
right,
But really, our goal with this is just to talk about modern day Halloween today that people celebrate, where it came from, and all that good stuff. I did want to point to something else that you mentioned in one of the definitions there about the worship of nature or the earth,
Mm-hmm.
that is also akin to those that practice witchcraft, which I see as
Right.
being different from the polytheistic religions. That's more new age. That's more, witches and mediums and things of that nature kind of fall into that same group. But you're going to talk a little bit about some of that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So share with us then, what exactly is Halloween and when did people start celebrating it?
Yeah. So pulling notes, I'm going to quote for a minute to define that, just to make it clear,
Mhm.
from the Encyclopedia Britannica to answer that question. Halloween has been around for more than 1,000 years. Originally a religious observance, it became increasingly secular over the centuries until its religious trappings all but disappeared. Today, Halloween is considered a holiday for dress up and fun, especially for children. Halloween's origins can be traced back to the ancient Celtic festival known as Samhain, which was held on November 1st in contemporary calendars. It was believed that on that day, the souls of the dead returned to their homes, so people dressed in costumes and lit bonfires to ward off spirits. In this way, popular Halloween tropes such as witches, ghosts, and goblins became associated with the holiday. In the 7th century, it says CE, what is that, AD? I don't know why we have to change these things. In the 7th century AD, Pope Boniface IV created All Saints' Day, originally celebrated on May 13th, so in the spring. A century later, Pope Gregory III moved the holiday to November 1st, likely as a Christian substitute for the pagan festival of Samhain. The day before, the saintly celebration became known as All Hallows' Eve, or Halloween. Though the holiday began in Celtic religions of Ireland, the United Kingdom, and France, it quickly spread to other parts of the world. The first American colonists in New England were forbidden to celebrate it for religious reasons, though it enjoyed some popularity in the southern colonies. By the 1800s, fall festivals marking the seasonal harvest incorporated Halloween elements, and Irish immigrants escaping the devastating potato famine brought with them many Halloween traditions that remain today.
Mm.
So a few things to touch on here to kind of break that down.
Unpack this. Yeah.
Yeah. Firstly, I've been hearing in the past few years, this has become a popular topic from certain groups of Christians. Some of them might have certain podcasts. I'm not going to name names. That claim this day is originally a Christian holiday, because the earliest primary sources for the observance of this holiday are All Saints' Day, and that Samhain comes later. This is what people claim today. Before we address All Saints' Day, because we're going to get into that, I got a lot to say about that. I just want to say that this line of thinking seems a bit of an uneducated claim, considering ancient Celts literally did not write their history down, so they can't have a early primary source, because technically a primary source is a written record, because the ancient Celts practiced oral tradition that was passed down from generation to generation for thousands and thousands of years. Does this mean that we completely throw out their history and all their traditions and their actual religion because we don't have a nice, neat manuscript documenting every detail like, the Catholic Church has been doing for 1,800 years or so?
Sure.
Like it to me is like, even though these were quote unquote pagans, I think it's kind of disrespectful to an entire country to be like, oh, none of that is true because you didn't write it down. Like oral
Should have wrote it
tradition.
down. It's ours now.
Yeah. And here's actually something to think about. Our own faith, the Christian faith, is technically originally oral traditions. If we're going to talk about the Bible and how we believe it to be, fact and truth of the history of the world, think about how then the earliest primary source for the creation story was Moses, which came thousands of years later, because there was no written record of any of that, because the Hebrew people were originally a culture that practiced oral tradition.
Mm-hmm.
So this is, and one of the reasons to me that I think it's kind of silly to discount an entire group of people's beliefs just because they practice oral tradition, because if we were going to do that, then we would have to do that to our own beliefs.
Yeah, I mean, I can corroborate this from a language perspective. I think I mentioned it on the show before that when I was in grad school, one of the classes I took was the history of the English language. And the earliest forms of English were not documented. And a lot of the background of the way that language evolved, especially in Ireland specifically, it was such an oral, things were passed down through the spoken word. But one
Right.
of the things that's mentioned a lot in the mother tongue was one of the books that I read, was about how different groups of people, they would live here remotely. They didn't have iPhones. They weren't communicating with
Yeah.
each other at all. So you had all these different pockets and different groups of people that they all kind of came from these same roots, but they would speak amongst each other and develop such a dialect that oftentimes they might not even be able to understand somebody from maybe way in the South or way in the North
Yeah.
or something of that nature. And if you think about it, it's very akin to America now, how people speak differently or have different accents in within North America. I'm talking about in the United States, in New York or New Jersey
Yeah.
versus Texas or South Carolina. And we have these different colloquialisms and different things that we say. But if you don't write those things down, then that's where things start to shift and change. And I think that's the point that you're trying to make here, you're trying to make here with the Celts, is that they weren't exactly sitting down like, we celebrated Halloween and this is how
About
we
salad.
did it.
Yeah.
I mean, they didn't have video cameras or anything like that either.
Yeah. Yeah. It's actually kind of remarkable what the Catholics, when they started, coming up in power, and what they really did, because they did write a lot of things down. Like, it was, a lot of historical records, or just letters back and forth between different bishops and popes. And, it doesn't, make everything that they said
Well,
gospel truth, but they were.
I think that we could also make the argument that the Roman Catholic Church has always had an agenda, and that agenda was to be the most powerful people. I mean, I don't even know to say church, because it was
It was about
always about power.
power.
They controlled everything. Watch any documentary, movie, book, whatever, about how the Roman Catholic Church controlled even every aspect of who married who thousands of years ago. When the Queen of Spain was marrying whoever she was going to marry, it was the Roman Catholic Church who dictated everything.
Yeah.
And you had to pay them a lot of money in order to get what you wanted. And that's why kings and queens, quote, we could say they controlled what went on, but really it was the Roman Catholic Church that was controlling them.
Right.
And I'm
Yeah.
not going to get into how it's still going on today,
Yeah.
but the fact that you pay for certain things definitely rubs me the wrong way.
Yeah. Yeah. The Catholic Church in general is going to be a common thread in all of these episodes.
In all the holiday episodes,
Yeah,
because
and
there
all
is
of,
a
yeah,
lot of influence.
right, exactly. So to kind of get back to then this people saying that, oh, actually All Saints Day came before Samhain, which, by the way, this can be kind of confusing. Samhain is spelled like Samhain,
Mhm.
Samhain, but it's pronounced Samhain. This is how Celtic language works. It really makes no
We don't make
sense.
the rules.
Yeah, exactly. So to get back to why I just think that that's a egregious claim to say that and to discount the history of the Celts because they didn't write it down. There is literal archaeological evidence of mounds in Ireland that are clear they were built for the observance of Samhain.
Mhm.
And the way they celebrated Samhain, it was considered one of the most holy days to them.
Mhm.
Actual mounds, like archaeological structures. So before we get into All Saints Day, let's explore Samhain a little bit more. Because this is all, both of these things play into modern day Halloween celebrations. So, what is Samhain? I'm going to quote from a website called newgrange.com because I looked at a ton of different resources for this and all of it kept coming back to this same structure in Ireland. In Celtic Ireland, about 2,000 years ago, Samhain was the division of the year between the lighter half, summer, and the darker half, winter. At Samhain, the division between this world and the other world was at its thinnest, allowing spirits to pass through. The family's ancestors were honored and invited home while harmful spirits were warded off. People wore costumes and masks to guise themselves as harmful spirits and thus avoid them. Bonfires and food played a large part in the festivities. The bones of slaughtered livestock were cast into a communal fire. Household fires were extinguished and started again from the bonfire. Food was prepared for the living and the dead. Food for the ancestors who were in no position to eat it was ritually shared with less well off. Two hills in the Boyne Valley were associated with Samhain in Celtic Ireland. Now, I don't know how to pronounce this word, but I'm going to say Tlachtka and Tara. Tlachtka was the location of the Great Fire Festival, which began on the eve of Samhain, now known as Halloween. Tara was also associated with Samhain. However, it was secondary to Tlachtka in this respect. The entrance passage to the Mound of the Hostages on the Hill of Tara is aligned with the rising sun around Samhain. The Mound of the Hostages is 4,500 to 5,000 years old, suggesting that Samhain was celebrated long before the first Celts arrived in Ireland about 2,500 years ago. The festival of Samhain marked the end of the Celtic year and the beginning of the new one, and as such can be seen to the equivalent of New Year's Eve. We have seen how the Celts believed that night preceded day, and so the festivities took place on the eve of Samhain. There is no doubt that the festival was the most important of the four Celtic festivals. Samhain was a crucial time of year loaded with symbolic significance for the pre-Christian Irish. The celebrations at Tlachtka may have had their origins in a fertility rite on the hill, but it gathered to itself a corpus of other beliefs which crystallized at the Great Fire Festival. So we can see this festival has evidence dating it back thousands of years before Christianity came to Ireland. And if you look up pictures of what was mentioned in that article of the mounds of hostages, and how literally on Samhain, which was November 1st, the rising sun, it has like a hole in the door of this mound. It perfectly aligns to illuminate a passage
Mm.
inside this. This is what's like crazy about ancient archaeological sites in general, is the way that they align them astronomically with certain events.
Mhm.
And that's how you know that that day and that time was significant to that people who went through a lot of effort to build it.
Yeah.
And apparently this site specifically possibly dates to be 5,000 years old.
Yeah. This is fascinating, but I have to say, we have so much more to get to when it comes to Halloween, All Saints Day, talking more about Samhain and these details that, guess what, guys? You're going to have to come back next week to listen
Yeah.
to the rest.
Yeah, because we are, like I keep saying, we got some talking to do about All Saints Day too.
We
So
have a lot to talk about. So if you are curious about the roots of continuing to hear the roots about this, about All Saints Day, stay tuned. We're coming back next week. We're going to be talking more about Halloween. So, with that said, thank you for joining us and for being on this mission. If you'd like to follow along outside the podcast, be sure to join us on Instagram, Facebook, or YouTube at The Radiant Mission. And if you're loving the show, find it fascinating, be sure to share it with a friend. And today we're going to be closing with 2 Corinthians 5, verse 15. And he died for all, so that they who live might no longer live for themselves, but for him who died and rose again on their behalf. We're wishing you a radiant week, and we'll see you next time.
bye, guys.